There are questions that echo long after they're asked. Some pierce your walls gently, some knock them down completely, and some change the course of your life. For Nurse Eliana Hart, it came at 2:17 a.m., whispered by a child whose body was broken but whose spirit glowed like sunrise after storm. Asterisk. The pediatric recovery wing of St. Matthew's Hospital had a unique kind of quiet. It wasn't the eerie silence of night, but rather a hush filled with soft lullabies, distant beeping monitors, and the gentle rhythm of life trying to heal. Nurse Eliana moved with practiced grace, her steps quiet, her hands steady, her sleeves long, always long. She was known as the nightlight among her colleagues, not just for her compassion, but for how she always seemed to bring warmth into the darkest hours. Yet very few knew how much darkness she carried herself. At bed 14, 7-year-old Ava Lynn had finally stopped crying. The burns on her left arm and chest were deep products of an apartment fire that started with faulty wiring and ended in emergency sirens and trauma. Her parents had survived. Their dog hadn't, and neither had Ava's sense of safety. Eliana had been attending to Ava for 3 days straight. They'd barely spoken until tonight. As she adjusted the forward drip, Ava opened her eyes. "Miss Eli," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," Eliana replied, tucking the sheets around her. "Are you hiding something under your sleeves?" Eliana's heart skipped. She looked down at her scrubs, her gloved hands, her long sleeves. She swallowed the knot that always rose when anyone got too close to the truth. "No, honey, just part of my uniform," she said gently, adjusting the hem as casually as possible. Ava studied her, not suspiciously, not accusingly, but curiously. I think you got burned once, too," she said matter-of-factly. "Like me." Eliana froze. Her hand paused, mid-adjustment of Ava's pillow. For a second, she forgot to breathe. "Ava," continued, her voice barely audible, "you don't wear short sleeves, ever. You wear gloves, even when you're not touching anything gross. And when that hot tray came near you earlier, you got really scared, like ... My mum gets when she hears the smoke alarm now." Eliana lowered herself slowly into the chair by Ava's bedside, her hands resting in her lap. Children see more than adults like to believe, especially children who've been through trauma. Ava wasn't guessing. She was remembering. "I won't tell anyone," Ava said, her big brown eyes shimmering under the low nightlight. "But if it's true, can you tell me? Because if you got better, maybe I can too." And there it was. The question. Not said with pity, not said with fear, but said with hope, and that made it harder than anything else. Asterisk. It had been 11 years, 4 months, and 3 days since the fire. A college dorm accident, an explosion that changed everything. She never spoke of it, not once, not even to herself. After months in recovery and countless surgeries, she reinvented herself as a survivor. But as someone who never needed to be asked what happened, she became reliable, gentle, always helpful, but also invisible. She wore her gloves like armor, her long sleeves like a veil, and her smile like a practiced script. No one asked what was underneath, until now, and she wasn't ready, except maybe she was, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the girl in front of her. Asterisk. Eliana slowly removed one glove. Just one. Ava leaned forward in silence, her eyes wide not with fear, but recognition. The scars were faint now, faded and textured like a map of a storm long past, but they were real. And Ava whispered, "They look like mine." A beat of silence passed between them, a sacred, unspoken connection. "I used to hide," Eliana said softly, "a lot. I still do sometimes." Ava nodded solemnly. "I don't want to hide forever," she whispered. "But it's hard." Eliana reached out and took Ava's tiny hand in hers. "I know," she said, "but you don't have to do it alone." And in that quiet moment between nurse and patient, scars stopped being secrets. They became stories. Stories that could heal. Asterisk. Ellie didn't sleep the next day. She went home, followed the same route she always took, east on Oak Ridge, left on Parkman. 3 rights through the quiet neighborhood with the overgrown hedges, and parked in her usual space under the flickering street. But everything felt different. She sat in her car long after the engine went silent, staring at her gloved hands resting on the steering wheel, the faint imprint of Ava's small fingers still lingering on her palm. That little girl had no idea what she'd done. Eliana had built her life on silence. She had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. At the hospital, she was admired, even loved, but only for the parts of herself she allowed others to see. Not one person there knew what happened that night 11 years ago. Not her colleagues, not even her closest friend on staff, Miriam, and certainly not Ava. But Ava saw through the layers in minutes, not because she was trying to be clever, but because she needed to understand. Eliana exhaled, finally opening the car door, each motion deliberate, like breaking the rhythm of a song she knew too well. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, the scent of jasmine from her neighbor's balcony garden drifting in the night air, mixing with the cool hum of a distant sprinkler. Inside, the space was as it had always been: immaculate, quiet, minimal, a bookshelf of old nursing textbooks, an electric kettle on the counter, and a framed photo of a landscape taken before she ever thought to fear heat and flame. Eliana didn't bother turning on the main light. She flicked on the lamp by the couch, sat down slowly, and stared at the coffee table in front of her. Her journal lay there, untouched for months. She reached for it with hesitant fingers, hesitated, then opened it to a blank page. She stared at the paper, white, clean, unmarked, just like the life she had tried to project. But it wasn't true. Not really. And maybe it was time to stop pretending. The pen hovered in her hand, then lowered, and for the first time in nearly a decade, Eliana began to write. Not charts, not medication logs, not polite thank you cards, but words that were hers, raw, uncertain, scared. I wasn't supposed to be in the dorm that night. Her breath caught in her throat, but she kept going. I came back early. I forgot my favorite sweater, the red one. I loved how it made me feel brave, confident. I left it hanging behind the door. I told myself I'd grab it and leave before the party got wild. The fire started 5 minutes after I got there. It spread faster than I ever imagined possible. I remember heat, screaming, then silence. I woke up 3 days later, covered in bandages. My parents never asked me why I was there. They just said, "You're lucky," but I didn't feel lucky. She paused, blinking hard against the tears that began to well. I haven't worn red since. Her hand trembled as she underlined the sentence. A knock at the door made her jump. 3 sharp raps, then a pause. She wiped her eyes quickly, set the journal down, and opened the door to find Miriam standing there with 2 steaming cups of tea. I had a weird feeling. Miriam said, "You okay?" Eliana nodded too quickly. "Of course. Just tired." Miriam raised an eyebrow, holding out one of the cups. "Well, if you're gonna lie, at least take the tea." Eliana smiled in spite of herself. They sat in silence for a while, sipping, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand conversation but allows for it. Then Miriam said, "Ava's been asking for you. She wouldn't let anyone else change her dressings." Today, Eliana's heart tightened. "She's special," Miriam added. "That kid, there's something in her. Like she sees more than she should." Eliana nodded slowly. "She does." Another pause. "She said something to me last night." Eliana began, her voice cracked a little. She said, "Maybe if I got better, she could too." Miriam didn't respond right away. She just reached over and placed her hand gently over Eliana's gloved one. "You don't have to be perfect to help someone heal," she said. "You just have to be real." The words struck something deep, because Eliana had been anything but real for years. Later that night, long after Miriam had left and the apartment had grown still again, Eliana stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She hadn't looked at her scars in months, maybe years, not really. She pulled off the gloves, peeled back the sleeves, and stood there. The skin was smooth in some places, raised in others, a patchwork of healing and memory, not ugly, not shameful, just human. She reached for the red sweater. She still had it, buried in the back of her closet like a secret love letter she couldn't throw away. She slipped it on. It didn't fit the same, but it didn't have to. She was learning how to be visible again, and for the first time in years, the reflection in the mirror didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like someone brave enough to face tomorrow, because tomorrow, she'd go back to Ava. And maybe, just maybe, she'd tell her a little more of the truth. Not because she had to, but because someone needed to know that healing wasn't just possible, it was worth it. The next morning, sunlight broke across the horizon like a quiet promise. Eliana stood at the edge of her bed, red sweater in hand, her fingers brushing the fabric like it was fragile glass. She hadn't decided whether she'd wear it to the hospital, only that she hadn't put it back in the closet. That alone felt like a quiet rebellion, a first breath after holding it in for years. As she dressed in her usual scrub top, she hesitated before pulling on the gloves. The scars were there, still part of her, still a story told in silence. But the difference now, she wasn't pretending they didn't exist. She touched them like someone greeting an old friend. And for once, the mirror didn't win. By the time she reached the hospital, the day shift had already filled the corridors with the comforting noise of movement, laughter from the nurses' station, the distant ring of call buttons, doctors murmuring in quick consults. She stepped into it all like a woman emerging from water. The pediatric wing smelled like vanilla-scented antiseptic and soft breakfast food. And there, in bed 14, Ava sat propped up by two pillows, a picture book open on her lap, untouched. Her eyes brightened the second she saw Eliana. "You came back. I said I would," Eliana replied, smiling. Ava looked her over carefully, like she was trying to solve a new puzzle. "You look different." Eliana knelt beside her bed, smoothing the blanket. "Maybe I am." There was a long pause, the kind that fills the room without needing to be explained. "I told my mum," Ava said suddenly. Eliana's hand stopped moving. "Told her what? That you got burned too." "Oh," she cried a little, Ava added, almost matter-of-factly, but happy crying. She said, "Maybe that's why you're so gentle." Eliana felt something stir in her chest, something between a break and a bloom. "I didn't mean to tell her," Ava continued, "but it made her feel better. She said I don't have to be afraid of the future if people like you made it through." Eliana blinked slowly. "That's a very brave thing to say." Ava shrugged, as if bravery was just part of her morning routine. "Do you still get scared?" The question was soft, but heavy, the kind of question that didn't ask for a perfect answer, just an honest one. "All the time," Eliana admitted, "but you don't show it." "Sometimes I do. I just got really good at hiding it." "Like with your sleeves?" Eliana nodded. "I used to hide too," Ava said, tracing the edge of her bandage with one small finger. "Even before the fire, I used to hide when my parents fought, or when I didn't feel strong." Eliana reached out, placing her hand gently over Ava's. "You don't have to hide anymore." Ava looked down at their hands, one small, one scarred, both healing. "Will you tell me your story?" she asked. Eliana hadn't told anyone, not really, not from the beginning, but for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Ava felt like the right person to hear it, not because she was a child, but because she understood something adults often forgot. Pain isn't always visible, and healing doesn't always start with medicine. So Eliana began. "I was in college. It was winter break, and everyone had gone home for the holidays. I forgot something, my favorite sweater, actually, and I went back to the dorm to get it. There was a party happening down the hall. I didn't go in. I wasn't dressed for it. I wasn't really in the mood. But someone lit candles, lots of them. One knocked over. It happened fast. 1 second, I was reaching for my sweater. The next, I woke up in a hospital bed." She paused. Ava's gaze didn't waver. "Everything changed after that," Eliana said. "I was supposed to study abroad the next semester. Instead, I spent 6 months in physical therapy, and the rest of the year trying to figure out who I was if I didn't look like the girl I used to be." "Did it hurt?" Ava asked. "Yes," Eliana answered, truthfully, "in more ways than one." Ava was quiet. "Then, but you still became a nurse." "I wasn't sure I could. I almost gave up. But then, someone helped me see that being hurt didn't make me less. It made me more aware, more patient, more present." "Was it another nurse?" "No," Eliana said, smiling softly. "It was a little girl, not much older than you. She sat with me every afternoon in rehab. She had scars too. She taught me how to laugh again, and how to stop counting the days since the fire, and start living them instead." Ava nodded slowly. "Maybe I'll do that too." They sat there for a while, not saying much, just being. In that stillness, Eliana felt something inside her shift, something quiet but sure. Later that day, in the break room, Miriam caught Eliana slipping off one of her gloves, casually rubbing lotion into her arm. Miriam did a double take. "You okay?" she asked, her tone careful. Eliana looked up and smiled. "I think I'm finally starting to be." Miriam didn't press. She just nodded and handed her a chocolate chip muffin. That night, as Eliana left the hospital, she passed the hallway mirror near the elevators, the one she used to avoid. She stopped. For a second, she just stood there, staring at her reflection. She still wore her sleeves, But the difference now, she wasn't hiding, she was choosing. Because healing didn't mean erasing the past. It meant walking through it one honest step at a time. And she was ready to take the next one. Eliana didn't mean to speak at the community event. She had only come because Miriam convinced her gently, persistently, like someone tugging at a thread until it loosened something locked deep inside. "It's just a wellness talk," Miriam had said, "not a TED talk. You don't even have to speak. Just be there. You'll like it." Eliana wasn't so sure, but something had shifted in her lately. Since Ava, since the glove, since the mirror, and when she stepped into the hospital's modest conference room that Saturday morning, the soft buzz of folding chairs, coffee cups, and quiet conversations met her like a tide. The walls were lined with hand-drawn posters from pediatric patients, one of them bright with crayon flames crossed out in blue wreath. "Healing isn't hiding." Ava's words. She hadn't written it, of course. She was still recovering, still attending therapy twice a week, but the phrase had carried on in the staff who loved her, the families who'd heard her story, and the small but growing circle of people who now saw Eliana not just as the nurse with quiet eyes, but the woman who had been through something. "Just listen," Miriam had said again, squeezing her shoulder before leaving to mingle. No pressure. But then someone didn't show. A speaker from the Burn Foundation, and before Eliana could blink, one of the organizers, a tall man with a clipboard and a warm smile, was asking if she might say something. Just a few words. About recovery, about presence, about hope. Eliana almost declined. She almost did what she'd always done. Shrank back, smiled politely, let the moment pass. But instead, she looked down at her hands bare, exposed. "Honest," Anne said, "I'll try." 10 minutes later, she stood behind a microphone, staring at a sea of expectant faces, mothers clutching coffee cups, teenagers twirling bracelets on anxious wrists, elderly couples leaning close. Her heart pounded in her chest. "This wasn't part of the plan," she said, and a few people chuckled, easing the air. "I wasn't supposed to speak today, but maybe that's the point. Life rarely goes as planned, and healing doesn't either." She paused, a deep breath. "I was burned in a fire 11 years ago. I don't usually tell people that, not because I'm ashamed, but because for a long time I thought that story made me less normal, less whole, less wholly of being seen." The room quieted. People leaned in. "I used to think healing meant covering everything up, my scars, my memories, my fear. I believed that if I could just keep everything hidden, sleeves, behind smiles, under control, then maybe I could go on with life like nothing ever happened." Her voice caught slightly, but she steadied it. But then, something changed, or rather, someone changed it. She looked out over the room, her eyes landing on a row of children from the hospital sitting cross-legged near the front. One of them had a bandage wrapped around her arm and a hand-drawn sticker on her shirt that read, "I'm brave." There was a little girl. Eliana continued. "She saw right through me, through the gloves, the long sleeves, the silence, and she asked me something no one else ever had. Can I be like you?" There was a hush. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to say, don't be like me. Be fearless, be bright, be free. But the truth is, I wasn't broken. I was just waiting to be brave enough to live again. And in that moment, her question showed me that maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't something to hide. A few quiet sniffles echoed through the room. "I still have bad days," she said. "I still reach for gloves without thinking. I still avoid bonfires and birthday candles, but I no longer avoid myself." And that's what healing really is. It's not forgetting what happened. It's choosing to live with it, gently, courageously, and out in the open. When Eliana stepped away from the microphone, there was no applause at first, just a pause, a collective stillness. Then it came, not loud or rushed, but steady, rising, honest. Afterward, people came up to her. A woman who had lost her husband in a house fire, a teenage boy with fresh skin grafts on his shoulder, a father whose daughter had stopped speaking after her injury. "You gave me words I couldn't find," the woman whispered. "My daughter wants to meet you," the father said. "She's 6, like the girl you mentioned." Eliana met them all with the same warmth she gave her patients, but inside, something new was blooming. Not confidence, not yet, but permission. Permission to be seen, to speak, to be more than what had happened to her. That night, back at home, She placed the red sweater on a hanger and slid it to the front of her closet, not as a symbol of pain, but as a reminder. She didn't need to hide to be strong. And somewhere, across the city, a little girl was telling her mother, "I want to be like Nurse Eliana." But this time Eliana knew what to say. "Be like you, sweetheart. Just be exactly like you." The hospital's walls had always held stories, quiet ones, some never spoken out loud, just passed in glances between nurses during long shifts or in the whispered moments between parent and child. But lately, those stories had started to change, not just in tone, but in visibility. It began slowly, the way most important things do. A hand-drawn sign appeared in the staff break room. "Every scar has a story. No name, no credit, just for..." Words written in bold marker, taped crookedly to the refrigerator door. Eliana spotted it one morning as she reached for her usual lemon yogurt. She stood there longer than necessary, fingers on the fridge handle, staring. Miriam saw her looking. "You didn't put it there?" she asked. Eliana shook her head. Miriam grinned. "Looks like you started something." She didn't know what to say, but deep down, something inside her smiled too. A few days later, a nurse named Diego, who always wore thick compression sleeves on his arms, came to work in a short-sleeved scrub top for the first time in 2 years. No fanfare, no explanation, just showed up like that shift had always been normal. When asked, he simply said, "I figured it was time." No one missed the way he glanced at Eliana when he said it. Then there was the teen patient named Ruby, a dancer, outgoing, quick-witted, a girl who used humor like armor. She'd suffered third-degree burns in a car accident and refused every support group invitation the hospital had offered. But one afternoon, Eliana stopped by her room and sat with her, not as a nurse doing rounds, but just a person I used to dance to, Eliana offered. "I mean, not well, but I tried." Ruby rolled her eyes. "That was before the fire." Eliana nodded. There was a pause. Then Ruby sat up straighter. "You don't talk like most grown-ups. You don't sound sorry for me." "I'm not," Eliana said, honest and calm, "because I know what it's like to feel like your body betrayed you. And I also know that your body is still yours, still powerful, still worthy." The next day, Ruby asked her physical therapist to put music on during rehab. 2 days later, she asked Eliana to join her. And a week after that, she danced slow, deliberate, beautiful, scars showing, confidence growing. Word started to spread, not as gossip, but as something more quiet and contagious. Hope. Patients and nurses alike began to leave folded notes in the break room suggestion box, stories, confessions, small brave admissions. "I haven't worn shorts in years. Yesterday I did. I told my son the truth about my scars. He hugged me and said he loves them. I thought I was the only one. I'm not, am I?" And one afternoon, a printed flyer appeared on the community board in the pediatric wing. "Scars Speak, a story wall project." Eliana stared at it, heart racing. The details were simple. Staff and patients could contribute a short piece, a paragraph, a quote, a drawing about a scar, physical or emotional, named or anonymous. The pieces would be posted in the hallway, near the chapel, a growing gallery of pain, healing, and strength. Miriam appeared beside her. "You have to submit something." Eliana hesitated. "I don't know what I'd say." "Say the thing you never let yourself say." So she wrote, not a long essay, just a few lines. "This scar is not what ruined me. It's what led me back to who I really was." The day it went up, she didn't tell anyone which one was hers. But Ava knew. The little girl, now 2 months into recovery and walking with steadier steps, beamed when she saw it. "That's yours," she said confidently. Eliana smiled, no longer surprised by Ava's way of knowing. "Yes, can I write one too?" "Of course." Ava's note, dictated to her mum and written in purple crayon, said, "My skin is different now, but I'm still the same brave girl inside." Over the next week, the wall filled first with just a few notes, then dozens, then more. By the end of the month, it wrapped around the corner, winding like a living testimony of what it meant to survive. But even as her impact rippled outward, Eliana found herself facing something she hadn't quite prepared for. People wanted her story in full. A local journalist had heard about the story wall. She came to the hospital to interview staff, and someone Eliana suspected Diego told her about the nurse who wore gloves for years and now didn't anymore. The journalist approached her gently. "You don't have to share anything," she said, "but I think your story could change lives." Eliana thought about it for days. She wrestled with the familiar instinct to shrink away, to say no, but she also remembered the girl who had once asked, "Can I be like you?" She remembered what it felt like to be seen. And so, for the first time outside hospital walls, Eliana sat down and told her story, every page, every pause, every scarred truth, not because she wanted attention, but because stories like hers, like Ava's, like Ruby's, like so many others, deserved light, not for the pain, but for the proof that healing is possible, that silence isn't strength, that vulnerability, when shared with kindness, becomes a bridge. And she was no longer standing behind walls, she was walking across bridges. Eliana never expected the world to listen, not in the way it did. When the article came out, tucked into the Sunday features section of the Dallas Chronicle, it was printed under a simple headline, "Nurse with the Red Sweater," a story of scars, strength, and second chances. Her name was in the byline, her photo below it, bare arms, open smile, standing beside a little girl holding her hand. She almost didn't read it. She knew the story. She had lived it. But Ava's mother texted her first. "You should see what you've done. It's not just words, it's movement." Within 48 hours, the hospital's inbox flooded. Dozens of emails, then hundreds, not just from Dallas, from Utah, from Maine, from as far as Cape Town. People who had read the story and saw themselves in her silence, in her courage, in the long road of recovery. One message read, "I've worn long sleeves in summer for 12 years. I didn't know I could stop. I didn't know I was allowed." Another, "From a retired firefighter, I thought my scars were the end of my story. He reminded me they might just be the beginning." There were invitations to pee from schools, burn survivor groups, nursing colleges, even an author who wanted to co-write her memoir. Eliana wasn't chasing fame, she wasn't even chasing recognition, but somehow, what she had hidden became what others needed to see. Still, she hesitated, not because she didn't care, but because her heart had always belonged first to quiet places, small rooms, and one-on-one moments. She was still learning how to be visible without being overwhelmed. Then one morning, an envelope appeared in her locker. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a young girl with visible skin grafts along her arms, holding up a sign in careful handwriting. "I wore short sleeves to school today because of you." There was no name, just a tiny heart drawn in the corner. Eliana sat down on the bench, holding that photo like it was made of porcelain. It wasn't the size of the stage that mattered. It was the size of the truth being shared, and truth, once set free, has a way of multiplying. So she agreed to speak at the National Pediatric Healing Conference that fall. She stood backstage in a crisp navy dress, no gloves, no sleeves. Her arms bore the quiet topography of her past, and her eyes shimmered not from fear, but from a feeling she hadn't quite named yet. Maybe it was peace, or maybe it belonging. When her name was called, the room of 600 professionals, survivors, and advocates rose in a quiet wave of applause. She stepped into the light, not as someone finally healed, but as someone healing out loud. "I don't have a miracle to offer," she said, her voice calm, steady. "What I have is a beginning, one that started when I stopped hiding, not from the world, but from myself." She told them about Ava, about the gloves, about the red sweater, about the moment she realized her story didn't have to be just about what was lost, but about what was rebuilt. After the speech, she walked the hallways of the venue and found herself surrounded not by fans, but by mirrors, other people with similar pain, other people carrying silence. One mother with tears in her eyes clutched her hand and whispered, "You made it okay for me to tell my daughter, I understand." An EMT showed her the pale silver mark on his neck. "Didn't think anyone would get it," he said. "Now I know better." Even days later, long after the applause had faded, the echoes stayed with her. Eliana returned to the hospital, not just as a nurse, but now as someone known. Patients stopped her in the hall to share their own progress. Young interns asked her how to speak gently to scared children. Families told her she gave them hope when they were running out. But the most unexpected change came from Ava. It was her last scheduled follow-up appointment. Her skin had healed remarkably well, but it was the way she carried herself that struck Eliana most. She wore a sleeveless purple dress with confidence, her hair tied in a playful bow, and she hugged Eliana tightly when they met. I brought you something, Ava said, pulling out a small shoebox wrapped in shimmering paper. Inside was a red sweater, child-sized, hand-knitted, with tiny embroidered stars along the sleeves. Eliana laughed softly. It's beautiful. Did you make this? My grandma helped. Ava beamed. It's for when you speak at schools, so the kids know your magic. Eliana knelt, blinking back tears. You know what, Ava? I think the real magic is what happens when someone like you decides to be brave. Ava tilted her head. You're the one who showed me how. That night, as Eliana sat at home and placed the little sweater on her bookshelf, right beside her own now retired red one, she realized something. Her story wasn't finished, not because there was more pain to endure, but because there was more light to share. She began planning a foundation, a support space for burn survivors, especially children, to share their stories through art, words, and community. It wouldn't be about the scars, it would be about the voices, the bravery in telling the truth, not just surviving it. And in the logo of that new foundation, stitched into every shirt, printed on every letterhead, was a single phrase: Can I be like you? Because now, Eliana finally knew the answer. Yes, you can. And maybe, just maybe, you already are.